clarification on the evaluation and how student achievement works into that. Now, another, let's see if I can find my notes here. Okay, there was a lot of talk about concerns and not a lot of talk about strengths. So I'm going to wonder how many of the strengths are brought forward in the new plan. And that's going to probably take some detailed study, which we probably can't do right now unless you can tell me in general what the plan is to bring forth the strengths into the new plan.
Well, those strengths cannot be forgotten, of course. And so as we go, when we get a little further in, and I think we should take a look and kind of it'd be a check to say here were the strengths, and with this new model, how many of those strengths still are in. It's kind of a test. But the strengths, as I recollect the strengths, I don't see how those would be nullified or reduced. A lot of the strengths were that, for instance, the plan was, when you read the document, it's clear, and there are a lot of positive things that I don't think would change. But I understand where you're coming from.
In my conversation with Russ, we talked about the professional impact credits, and part of that, within that potpourri of credit possibilities, there was CLS. So it seems to me that CLS is becoming an optional item rather than a definite target. Is this correct?
The plan does not minimize the importance of CLS. It does offer perhaps another alternative, but the CLS is still at the heart of this plan. It's a very good, systematic way to teach, and there are some concerns that it was too much focused on CLS and was preventing some employees to move to that last stage. We currently have 3. So the thought was that that was a barrier to some other teacher that might find some other ways that are as comparable as the CLS. So I don't think the message wanted to be sent that that is still not going to be a vital part of this plan.
Well, when you talk about it, as some teacher finding some other alternative, that does make it an optional item.
That's true.
Yeah.
But the other points that they're going to earn are not going to be just, here you go, hand them out. They should be as strenuous and as demanding as CLS.
And if I could just comment a little bit. The classroom learning systems is a model for continuous improvement practices. And continuous improvement practices remain embedded within the classroom and within the day-to-day activities. They're just not not the only way. They remain part of the compensation model as it's being developed now, but not the only way. So a teacher may be using many of the tools in a continuous improvement model, in a CLS model, but that may not be the way they're choosing to really look at gaining their professional impact credits.
Well, my concern is still that CLS is made an optional item, and I see CLS as being one of the components of the current plan, which is focused on student success, in that it draws the student in and engages the student in working toward success as far as they can on their own initiative, so to speak. And another factor there is that if it's only practiced in some classrooms and a student moves from a CLS classroom to a non-CLS classroom to a CLS classroom, that's just going to be total think there's a very vital thing we're missing here, and that is an overall evaluation of CLS as to whether or not it is the thing that we are going to do across the board, or it's just something that's optional. Or maybe it's not even something we should do at all.
So I guess that's a question back to the team and to us. Obviously that's, I would guess many of us are having that same thoughts in our head. Are we going to be evaluating CLS, and will we hear that by January 22nd?
So that would be a curriculum evaluation process as well. And so that is not on the curriculum docket by January 22nd.
Okay.
So evaluating the impact of CLS is not on our radar for this year. But we can add that.
In your spare time?
Not this year, but down the road, I will gladly. And I would look at the broad practice of continuous improvement. There's a long history of that in education. But I understand one important component that Mr. Schmiggy brought up is a consistent vocabulary across the board, and that common language that would exist classroom to classroom. And I agree that is important to identify.
I think the strength of, I've seen it in a few classrooms lately. What strikes me is it's systematic. It uses sound teaching methods and those kinds of things, and it's systematic. So that provides structure. And as you know, with any kind of system that's tried and true, and it's a good process that's been tested, you're going to have good outcomes.
Right, but then it would go back to the question of every student learns differently, and how does that actually impact the one student? You know, one student might learn really well from that. Another student might say this is, you know, way too systematic or way too, you know, overwhelming to me to have to, I don't know all the details, but you know what I'm saying, every student learns differently.
Well, there's different learning styles. Yes.
Right, so I think that, you know, as we're looking at that, we need to, as we're always trying to make sure we're talking about our students first, that's a critical piece to me, to find out, you know, not everything is cookie cutter. Not everything works exactly the same in one classroom versus another. Not every teacher, not every student are the same. So I know it's a really difficult task, and we're looking at, you know, hundreds and hundreds of students as well as teachers. So I would just say that we need to really, if we want to put together a plan that works for our students, but also for our staff. So it's critical, I think, that we are on the same page. I agree with continuous improvement. That's obviously something that we all have to live with every single day in our own jobs. We're all continually evaluating ourselves as well as our processes. So that's an important piece. I think in what I'm hearing, CLS is a methodology on how you get there, but there are probably hundreds of other methodologies on how you get there as well. So I like to see us examine more of this as opposed to just jamming down our throats one particular method that might not work for everyone, or might not even work for half of our students or half of our teachers. So I think this is a bigger can of worms than potentially just looking at, you know, this piece of it and saying we're going to be done by January 22nd, probably not realistic. But I realize that this just opens up a much larger can of worms. Probably 5 more committees will need to study.
Well,
Can I address the CLS thing? Because the teachers talked about this quite a bit. And I think really the understanding that we came to is that although CLS was working very well for some teachers, working really well in some classrooms, that it wasn't working in all classrooms. And there's certain populations of students that it wasn't working with, and there are different teaching styles, and this idea of every student having the exact same experience in every single classroom wasn't necessarily working. And so we had a compensation plan that was rewarding one type of teaching style instead of all successful teaching styles. So we have a situation, for instance, at McLean, where they get the highest test scores in the county, and yet there's not a single CLS model classroom teacher in that building that year, which tells you there are other ways to be a great teacher. And so it was important to us to leave CLS in there because it's working. There are classrooms where teachers are doing phenomenal things with CLS. It clicks with their style, it clicks with the kind of students that they are teaching, and so we left it in there for that reason. But we also came to the understanding that it was just one of several different ways to show that you're growing in the profession. And so that's why we made that decision.
If I may, point of order, not getting off the subject of the framework per se.
is, we heard the concerns, like 90 concerns or whatever with the previous plan. Why do you think this particular one will work? You know, from your staff, parent, kids in school, whatever perspective, why does this one seem?
When we went through the very large list of concerns, we started to pick out themes that kept coming up over and over again. And one of the themes was that it didn't reward experience, and that teachers felt that we were losing some of our experienced teachers because once you got to a certain point in the pay scale, there was no more movement here. But if you went to another school district, you could move. And that was something that we definitely wanted to address. And so that's where we came up with the idea of the levels. Another thing that came out very clearly in the concerns as a general theme was that not all teachers could fit in that salary framework. So in terms of if you worked with a special ed population or an at-risk population, there weren't as many opportunities. And so that's why we tried to make, okay, how do we do this so there's multiple ways to advance? How do we do this to recognize great teaching in all kinds of different avenues with all kinds of different students? And so I think that because in this plan, and again, we did take the basic premise of the current salary plan and just said, okay, how do we add more avenues? How do we increase recognition of great teaching in the district? And I think that it's because of that wide variety that we came up with, that's why it will work. It incentivizes any kind of teacher, not just AP teachers or Project Lead the Way teachers. It gives the same incentives to an elementary school teacher as it does a middle school teacher, as it does a high school teacher.